Yes, thank you for inviting me. Look, it's a very minimal acknowledgement, and as you said, it comes as a result of some other Anglo-American media which has recognised the damage to some military sites. The official did not name any of the sites, the Israeli official didn't name any of the sites, and maintains the idea that effectively the Israelis won this exchange through their technological dominance. There was a report a week ago in the Times of Israel. The one you're referring to is yesterday, I think, in the 8th of July. And the one on the 1st of July, they carry very similar messages. In fact, the most recent one, based on this anonymous official, says that there were 42 hits by Iranian missiles. The one a week ago said there were 70 hits by Iranian missiles. So they've actually walked back the amount of damage there. And each time they're maintaining that the Iranians were deliberately targeting civilians, and that the Israelis had these carefully targeted attacks and so on. Even they called it the blood wedding or something like that, which indicates that they're slaughtering civilians. And even though they acknowledged that there was about 1,000 Iranian civilians killed, or 1,000 Iranians killed, and only 28 Israelis, they're still claiming that their attacks were very targeted, much more targeted, and that they exhibited their technological dominance. So really, there's an ongoing myth building in the minds of the Israeli media, despite these very minimal acknowledgements forced on them by the Anglo-American media.
Right. There was also a report by the Telegraph, if I'm correct, which said 5 of the bases of the Israeli occupation forces were struck by 6 Iranian ballistic missiles during the war. Among those facilities were a major air base, an intelligence center, and a logistics base as well. In your opinion, what does this say about Iran's deterrence and retaliatory capabilities?
It doesn't say that much, because we're interpolating what the Anglo-American and the Israeli media are saying, and they've conceded that these bases were hit. They also say that same Times of Israel report says that there were 36 Iranian missile impacts, apart from the 6 on the 5 military bases you mentioned. Well, as I said a week earlier, they said that they'd intercepted 86% of the missiles, of 500 missiles, which means that 70 of them got through. So it's not really any revelations coming out of there. They're being forced to acknowledge that some of their military sites were hit, but they're still maintaining this idea that the Iranians were deliberately targeting civilians, and that their strikes are very targeted. So I'm afraid we don't learn too much from what the Israelis say about themselves. They're doing it to impress other people.
Right. And overall, what were the Israelis trying to cover up without trying to prevent the divulgence of this information?
Well, as we all know, they have a military censorship over all of the reporters, the Israeli and the Europeans, anyone else who can get in there. Any of the pro-Arab or pro-Muslim reporters are typically kidnapped or exiled or killed, basically. But so there's been really an iron curtain over the information there, and I'm afraid they're not really revealing much more. They're simply admitting what everyone knows, that some of those sites were hit, and they were filmed being hit. At Haifa refinery, for example, we know that enormous damage was done. I think they've admitted that almost $3 billion in damage was done to Haifa refinery. Now there's a debate about whether they're going to rebuild it or move it somewhere else. So they are forced to admit certain things, but they are not going to admit much about the character of the Iranian retaliation, even though they do call it retaliation. So they acknowledge that their sneak attack was an aggression, basically. But they're still saying, for example, that their attacks were enormously targeted, and the Iranians were, what did they say exactly? They said they were deliberately targeting residential areas, and even though they acknowledged that only 28 were killed, as I said. So we're not much the wiser by only relying on Iranian media, I'm afraid.
Tim Anderson joining us from Sydney.
Thanks.